and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1.
You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. Write all of your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the real test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. A campus radio station is going to be in action. An interviewer is interviewing a man from the university for the survey. Listen to the conversation between them and circle the best answer from A, B, or C for questions 1 to 4. You now have some time to read questions 1 to 4. You will see there is an example which has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Excuse me, I'm conducting a campus survey. Would you have time to answer a few questions?
What's it all about?
We're doing some market research for a new campus radio station starting in the next few months.
That's okay. Sounds good.
Great. I'll just work through this form with you. And if we could start with some personal background information?
Sure.
Right. If I could have your age, please.
26.
Okay, good.
The teacher being interviewed is 26 years old, so B is circled. Now, we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will never hear the recording for the second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Excuse me, I'm conducting a campus survey. Would you have time to answer a few questions?
What's it all about?
We're doing some market research for a new campus radio station starting in the next few months.
That's okay. Sounds good.
Great. I'll just work through this form with you. And if we could start with some personal background information?
Sure.
Right. If I could have your age, please.
26.
Okay, good. And are you a student, teacher, or in another job?
Well, I'm a tutor, but I'm also a postgraduate student, so I don't know what you might call me.
What do you think?
Okay, well, I'm more of a teacher, really.
Fine. And would you mind if I asked about your salary, or I could leave it blank?
No, that's okay. It's $20,000 a year.
Thanks. Right. Now about your current listening habits. What would you say is your main reason for listening to radio?
Well, I'm usually busy during the day at work, so I usually only listen to the radio at night. It helps me relax and unwind, even if I'm studying.
Good. And how many hours a day on average do you listen to the radio?
Well, not a lot really. I'd say just over an hour all told.
Now you have some time to read questions 5 to 10. Now listen to the second part of the interview and answer questions 5 to 10.
So, what are the 2 main times of the day that you listen to the radio?
Well, for a little while around breakfast time, and then it tends to be later, after dinner, when I've finished any serious work I need to do.
And what sort of radio programs do you like?
I like the news, but I also like classical music. It helps me to relax.
Fine. And turning to the new campus station, which type of programs would you prefer?
I think the existing radio stations cater for my need for news. So I'd like to see programs about local information, providing a service to the campus community. And in the same vein, perhaps more for academic viewers, some lectures or relevant programs.
I see. And if you had to give the new director some specific advice when they set up the station, what would you tell them?
I think I'd advise them to be careful about the quality of the broadcasts. The sound system. There are a lot of radio stations and people can change their loyalty quickly if it doesn't meet their needs. I think they should do more of these kinds of interview too, talking with existing and potential customers.
Oh, I'm pleased you think it's useful.
Certainly, yeah.
Good. Now, this station will not be fully funded by the university. So how often do you think it is tolerable to have adverts?
I think, out of that list, I'd say every quarter of an hour. Of course, that's providing they don't last for 10 minutes each time.
Oh, quite. And are you interested in attending any of the special promotions for the new station?
Yes, I'd be happy to, as long as they're held on the campus or nearby.
OK, I'll note that down. And finally, may we put you on our mailing list?
Well, I prefer not, except for the information about the promotions you just mentioned.
OK. Can I have your name and address?
Of course. I have a card I can give you.
Oh, great. And thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
That is the end of part 1.
Now you have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
You'll hear a conversation among two students and their tutor about the presentation they are going to make at the tutorial class.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
I feel a bit nervous. I haven't done that before. Although many of my classmates in the same tutorial group have finished theirs. But I think them a little uninteresting because they just read out their notes. I hope mine will be more attractive
It seems you have a higher demand for yourself. As for me, I have no sense of uneasiness because I made one last semester, but I feel no sense of satisfaction about it. It lacked strong arguments, I think. How much did you get for the last presentation, Jason? 83% actually, but my goal for the next one is over 87%. It's pretty good. What is your topic for this one? Strategies for reading. I feel my biggest problem is in the reading speed, rather than vocabulary, which is most students' problem, though. I am slow, especially in reading articles on my major courses. They are complex and dull. Have you found any effective methods? Well, I am not quite sure. I suppose to skim the books or articles is a good approach. Yes, by skimming the book first, you get the choicest parts. It saves a lot of time. You don't have to read every word of the passage, but you have to learn to read certain parts intensively. Yes, I include that in my presentation. There is one thing I'm not clear yet. Why don't we make presentations more related to our major? Once you learn to write clearly, read analytically, and listen to lectures effectively, you'll begin professional tutorials. That means you should...
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
6. Well, Karen, how is your presentation?
I am still in a panic. I want to find some more interesting topics about writing, but I wonder what articles I can refer to, because there are so many of them.
Did you get the list of the reading materials handed out last class?
Yes, but there are over 20 on it. I have only a week to prepare, so I wonder if
Okay,
you could...
let me give you some suggestions. You needn't read them all because some of them deal with the same issue. The article by Halsworth is really worth reading. It covers the aspects of organising the thoughts and ideas.
Okay, Halsworth.
You should also read the article by Jackson, but just look at the part on research methodology, how they did it.
Right, I'll read that one.
You should also read the article by Fisher, but just look at the part on the writing plan. That is, how to plan your writing in a systematical way.
Okay, Fisher, got that.
And if you have time, the one by Risewell says very relevant things. It teaches how to title your articles and make it appealing. You should finish the whole book.
Okay.
Now, the one by Burns, if I were you, I wouldn't bother with the whole passage. Just read the conclusion, which summarises the use of rhetoric.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you very much.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
You'll hear an interview on IQ tests. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 30. Now listen carefully to the interview and answer questions 21 to 30. Mrs. Kellerman, a specialist in child psychology, is interviewed by Bridget.
Mrs. Kellerman, why is it that some children perform much better than others at school? Obviously, it can't be denied that certain children are brighter than others, but it's not as simple as that. A lot of emphasis is placed on intelligence measured by tests, so-called IQ tests, which only measure certain types of intelligence, such as basically linguistic and numerical skills, or reading and mathematics to put it plainly, which is unfortunate because some children are bound to suffer. A good example was a friend of mine's son who was kept out of the top class at school because of his average IQ. That's around 100. His father, though he had no idea his son was going to be an architect, always said he was a clever child. Apparently, he was able to picture things in his mind and draw accurately at a very early age. The point is that his university life might not have been so difficult if his ability had been recognized sooner. What you're saying, then, is that some children have abilities that are not easy to measure, that aren't appreciated by many schools. Precisely. And if these schools are not spotted sufficiently early, they cannot be developed. That's why, in my view, there are so many unhappy adults in the world. They are not doing the things they are best at. What are those other kinds of intelligence? How can we recognize them in our children? Well, take musical talent. Many children never get the chance to learn to play an instrument, but while they might not become great artists or composers, they may get a lot of pleasure and satisfaction. Musically gifted children are fascinated by all kinds of sounds, car horns, animal noises, and so on, and they can easily recognize tunes and sing them in key. How can a parent encourage them? Sing to them and teach them new songs. Buy a piano or even a cheap instrument such as a recorder. If you can afford it, send them to music lessons as soon as possible. Play recordings of different instruments to them. What about a child who is good at sport? Could that be described as a form of intelligence? Most certainly. We psychologists call it motor or bodily intelligence. These children move gracefully and handle objects skillfully. A child who finds it easy to take things apart and use various tools may well become an engineer with the right encouragement. We should give them models to make and take them to science museums. However, unless these children are also good with words and numbers, they will probably not do well in school examinations. Is there anything a parent can do to help in this case? Yes, it may be worth spending money on private lessons, but, hardly anyone is good at everything. In my opinion, a child should be judged on his individual talents. After all, being happy in life is putting your skills to good use, no matter what they are.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
You will hear Rebecca Bramwell, an artist and illustrator, giving advice on how to get your first job or commission as an artist. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 35. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 35.
I'd like to introduce Rebecca Bramwell, an artist and illustrator who has come along today to talk to you all about getting your first job or commission as an artist. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you for inviting me. I remember when I graduated back in 1983, I was very excited about getting my first commission. My degree was in fine art and I'd worked long and hard to get it. I was an enthusiastic student and I never found it difficult to find the incentive to paint. I think as a student you're pushed along by fellow students and tutors and the driving force is there. However, when you leave college, you find yourself saying things like, I'll have one more cup of coffee and then I'll sit down to work. I hate to admit it, but I say it myself. Suddenly, it isn't finding the inspiration or getting the right paper that's a problem. It's you. In my view, there are a number of reasons why this happens. It's a real challenge making a decent living as a new artist. You have to find a market for your work. Often you work freelance and need to take samples or portfolios of your work from place to place. These experiences are common to a lot of professional people. But artists also have to bare their souls to the world, in a way. More than anything, they want praise. If people don't like what they create, then it can be a very emotional and upsetting experience hearing them say this. I began to realise that these problems were preventing me from having a career in art, and so I decided to experiment. I was a painter, but I started to dabble in illustration, drawing pictures for books, cards, and this offered me the opportunity to become more emotionally detached from my work. I was no longer producing images from the heart, but developing images for a specified subject, taking a more practical approach. I began to develop a collection of my illustrations, which I put into a portfolio and started to carry around with me to show prospective clients and employers. But it was still tricky because publishers, for example, want to know that your drawings will reproduce well in a book. But without having had any work published, it's hard to prove this. Having a wonderful portfolio or a collection of original artwork is, of course, a first step. But what most potential clients would like to see is printed artwork, and without this evidence, they tend to hold back still when it comes to offering a contract.
Look at questions 36 to 40. Now answer questions 36 to 40.
Well, I overcame this problem in two ways. And I suppose this is my advice to you on preparing your portfolio of your best work. The first way was by submitting my work for a competition. And the one I chose was for a horoscope design and was sponsored by a top women's magazine. There are a few of these competitions each year, and they offer new illustrators an opportunity to showcase their work. The other approach I took was to design and print some mock-up pages of a book. In other words, I placed some of my illustrations next to some text in order to demonstrate how my work would look when it was printed. Perhaps I was lucky in that I had taken a degree that provided me with all-round creative skills so that I could vary my style and wasn't limited to a certain technique. Now, I think that is important. The art world and many other creative fields do try to pigeonhole people into snug boxes with an accompanying label. Now, I think you should try to resist this if you feel it happening to you. If you don't, you'll find it difficult to have new work accepted if you try to develop your style at a later stage in your career. Nevertheless, when you start out, and particularly when you're going for an interview, it's important not to confuse people by having a lot of different examples in your portfolio. One remedy for this is to separate your work into distinct categories. In my case, I did this by dividing my design-inspired illustrations from my paintings. It's then easier to analyse the market suited to each portfolio, such as magazines, book jackets, CD covers, etc. Working under two names is also useful, as it clarifies the different approaches and offers a distinction between them. I think it's been hard for artists to be recognised in anything other than the pigeonholes that they've been placed in. But luckily, these barriers are slowly being demolished. So I really do wish you all the very...
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.